Can you imagine being at 20,000 feet and all of a sudden your fuel filter bypass filter lights go off, not only for one engine, but the other engine also. So what we're going to talk about today is aviation fuel contaminated by diesel exhaust fluid and what happened and how we can prevent it. So let's just look at a timeline. The first one we know of was reported in 2014. Then it happened again in 2017, 2018, 2019, and it just happened this year in 2023. And what happened is each time diesel exhaust fluid was put into the fizzy injection tank, and then it was injected into the jet fuel. So with that, let's look at what happens. What happens when it comes in contact with jet fuel? How it got injected into the aircraft, and ways to prevent diesel exhaust fluid contamination from happening again. So if you look at diesel exhaust fluid, it's a clear fluid, just like FSI, fuel system icing inhibitor, is. They're both clear fluids. You can't tell a difference by looking at them, but there is a major difference. So what happens when diesel exhaust fluid is injected into the fuel? It becomes crystallization. It crowds up and crystals become on the system. And if you look at the filter that came out of one of the aircrafts, you can see that it just crystallizes over the filter and completely shuts off the flow of fuel through that filter. So here's another one. You can see what it does to the filter vessel inside those aircraft. This is inside the fuel tank. You can see all those crystals. It contaminates everything it touches. It crystallizes, and it is impossible to get it totally out of there without a lot of maintenance and work. So how did this happen? Well, the new jet trucks have diesel exhaust systems on them for the diesel engines. They use diesel exhaust fluid in the exhaust system. And if you look over to the right, they have a small tank that you put the diesel exhaust fluid in. Also, some jet refueler trucks use injector systems to inject FSII, and they also have a tank on them. And what has happened in these cases is somebody got confused and put diesel exhaust fluid into the fizzy tank. And there's been multiple things that have happened, and we'll show you a couple of them. First of all, if you look at this injection system on this truck, you'll notice that you have a container that's no labels, which is already setting up for a problem. But that's the fizzy injection system. And you got to remember, that's for fizzy, FSI, fuel system icing inhibitor. But the thing that people don't understand is any bucket or funnel that touches diesel exhaust fluid becomes contaminated with diesel exhaust fluid. Trace amounts can cause problems. So if you use a funnel to put diesel exhaust fluid into the diesel DEF tank, and then you use that same funnel to put FSI into your thing, you can have trace contaminations or a bucket. So that's one of the causes of contamination, is the equipment not being segregated, not being protected. Another thing is the labeling. You look at the left and now you look at the right. But if there's no label on it, confusion can happen. Here's a system. They do have it labeled PRIST, which is another brand name for FSII. On the left-hand side, you see a cam lock. On the right-hand side, they've got a secured fitting with safety wire. You can also take padlocks and secure this stuff. But, it's an easy mistake that humans can make, especially if we're in a hurry and not focused on what we're doing. Gammon makes stickers for your equipment. You can order them. Other people make stickers also, but everything should be labeled. and that will help prevent a mistake. We don't recommend purchasing diesel exhaust fluid in DEF or DEF in 55-gallon drums, because then you end up with buckets or funnels or containers to get that to your truck to put it in. And those all become sources of contamination, possibly, if they're used somewhere else. You should never transfer DEF in containers or use any kind of funnels. You know, that's why we recommend using the 2.5-gallon jug that has its own funnel. But after you get done using this container, you got to make sure you properly dispose of it, because that has DEF in it. Never use a DEF container for anything. Dispose of it. So with that, we get into storing the DEF in a secure place. And anyone that has access to the DEF needs to be fully trained. You got to remember, if you put DEF in a fizzy tank, it's going to get into the fuel and it's going to contaminate it and bring an aircraft out of the sky. We've seen multiple situations, 5 that we know of, and each one of those had multiple airplanes. You know, it could, you know, one of them had over 11 aircrafts that were contaminated with DEF. So we got to make sure it's secured. Even if you don't do injection, but you have DEF at your airport, it needs to be secured, and no one should be able to get to it. And anybody that does get to it should be fully trained. We put this document out there. You can download it. It's a good document from NTSB, but it's not only about DEF. Every container of product, we should know what's in it. It should be labeled. Everywhere we go, we should be able to look at that container and say, this is a DEF container. This is an FSI container, because we got the proper labels on those containers. That's how we prevent mistakes from happening, is to do those procedures and those things so we don't have a tragedy when an aircraft gets DEF into it. So preventmisfueling.com has a great website. It talks about misfueling, but also if you look at that box in the middle, it says DEF contamination presentation. There's a lot of information if you click on there. You can click on there and it opens up to this page. And if you look down at the resources, there's safety alerts, there's operational best practices, there's a really good EI video that you can show people of what happens. There's NATA safety first alerts, EI documents, there's FAA documents, but all those documents are there for free. Just go to preventmisfueling.com, download those documents, watch that video, and make sure that everybody at your FBO understands what can happen if DEF is accidentally put into an FSI injection tank. So, you know, I want to talk about a couple. One of them, and this is the reason why we don't, or I don't think you should have 55-gallon drums of DEF. Not only do you have to have a container that gets it there, but you have to have funnels and everything else. But one of the situations happened was because they had a fizzy tank, 55-gallon tank, back in 2017, and they had a DEF tank at that location. The military came in with, I think, about 10 or 12 aircraft. They all needed FSI injected into the fuel. They fueled the first 7 or 8. They noticed that the fizzy tank on the truck was getting low. So he radioed in to another employee that says, hey, I need FSI brought down to the truck so I can finish fueling these last few aircraft because I'm about to run out. The young man went in and he said he was relatively new. He went in and said, where's it at? That's the first sign of a problem about to take place. But he said, well, go in the hangar. You'll see a 5-gallon bucket. a fizzy, grab that container, and bring it out. He gets in there and radios back and says the container's almost empty. The guy on the radio said, well, go fill it up. There's a 55-gallon drum with a pump on it. The young man looked to the right, and he saw a 55-gallon drum with a pump on it. Not sure where the label was, or if he looked at the label or what, if it even was facing forward or backwards, who knows. He pumped it up, being the fact that DEF and fizzy looks the same, went into that container and he took it out. But that container was DEF. If he would have looked the other direction, he would have seen another tank, 55-gallon drum, with another pump, and that was the FSI. So, you know, the theory is, if it would have been a 2.5-gallon jug of DEF, it wouldn't have been that mistake. 55-gallon drums look alike, and they can cause problems. And remember, anything DEF touches becomes contaminated. So, want to always think about what our procedures and processes are. Go look at your system and see. Make sure your DEF is secured. And we highly recommend 2.5-gallon jugs of DEF. Something else to think about, a mistake no one learns from is just a tragedy waiting to happen. You know, if you look back at those 5, in 2014 it happened, but nobody talked about it. And, you know, nobody knew about it except for the people around it. 2017, it happened again. This time we did talk about it. You know, came out with stuff from NATA to push out to the FBOs to make sure that we have procedures in place. 2018, it happened again. Once again, procedures, reminders. 2019 happened again. And that's the aircraft that was at 20,000 feet. Or actually the 2018 was at 20,000. 2019, they landed that aircraft with no power, dead stick landing. A lot of training went out, a lot of stuff in the industry. We talked to people. But it happened again in 2023 because a breakdown in procedures. You know, what happened in 2023? What happened in 2019? We have to learn from those mistakes so we don't repeat them. So far, every aircraft's been able to land without a crash, but we're close. And to having a tragedy. So, I want everybody to think about something before we go to questions and answers. We're all humans. We all make mistakes. We can all learn from those mistakes, but we first have to understand why they happened, and then we have to tell our story. Because if we just don't talk about it, it's not going to go away. It's just going to happen to somebody else. So if you make a mistake or something, please report it to the industry. Help us figure out what happened, and then let us tell the story to make sure it doesn't happen again. Back to that preventmisfueling.com page. There's a lot of great information on that page, not only DEF contamination, but also misfueling. And I just want to touch for just a second. In the last 3 months, there's been 5 aircrafts misfueled. Jet fuel put into piston airplanes, or straight jet fuel put into an aircraft that needed jet fuel with FSI. So take the time to not only go back and review DEF contamination prevention, but also misfueling. We have to continue to talk about it to prevent another tragedy. So with that, we'll go ahead and go to some questions, and we can go from there.
So now the first question, Keith, what's the biggest reason that do you think this continues to happen?
I think, honestly, I talk to a lot of FBOs, and one of the things that really bothers me is when an FBO says, it's not going to happen here. Those people weren't thinking. You know, you know, it's it gets back to that attitude, and that attitude is, it's not going to happen to me. And in reality, I can promise you, these people at these FBOs probably never thought it was going to happen to them. If I talk to the people about misfuelings, I can't believe it happened. So sometimes our ego gets in the way, and we got to stop and remember that we're all humans, we all make mistakes, and we got to take time to do training and continue to talk about it. So I just think it's complacency and that attitude. So continue to talk about it. And the other thing that bothers me is when people don't report mistakes, because those 5 aircraft misfuelings, we actually found out from pilots and people that knew those aircrafts. Yeah, 4 of them didn't take off, and they drained the fuel out and everything was okay. One of them did take off. One of them had a 3-month-old grandbaby on that plane, and jet fuel was put in that aircraft. And it's not just an FBO problem, because pilot signed a ticket that said jet fuel. They weren't paying attention either. So we just got to be careful. But with DEF, we training procedures, and we never deviate from them. If you fill up a 2.5-gallon jug and you fill it up and it can't go all back into that container on the truck, that jug gets put back into a secured location, and it's got a label on it, and we know what we're doing. We don't stop. We continue to get that thing secured back up.
Okay, there's another question. Are there any approved test procedures to detect DEF contamination in FSII?
Yeah, if you go to preventmisfueling.com, you can see a test kit that Gammon Technical's selling. I've never used it. It actually tests the fluid that's in that FSI tank to see if there's contamination. Remember, DEF is about 2/3 water and about 1/3 urea, and that's what crystallizes. So the fizzy and the DEF will combine, because fizzy goes to water. So when you mix them together, it's not going to separate like jet fuel and water. So there is a test kit available. I've never used it. You can talk to Gammon Technical about it. And if you go to the Gammon Technical, or if you click on that thing, there's a little video that shows how it works. But definitely go look at the DEF prevention today. And don't just look at it today. Continue to look at it on a quarterly basis, 6 months. Keep working on it, because it can happen so fast.
The next question, do you have any idea the cost to repair the aircraft? And along with that, what about the FSII injection system on the refueler?
Let's touch on the refueler real quick. Anything DEF gets in there, you can't just flush it out with jet fuel. You got to clean it with water. There's a process, a procedure. But honestly, that injection system is probably destroyed, and anything in there. So it's a major thing. One of those, I watched a webinar, a podcast on the second DEF, and they said it was over $2 million to get that aircraft back in service. And it took 4 months that aircraft was out of service. It's a major disaster. Thank God nobody died, but it's expensive. But we have to, and that's why we have procedures. And that's why we do it the same way, and we do training, and we never stop training.
Okay, we've got quite a few questions. Let's see. A truck's Jet A tank gets contaminated with DEF. It gets caught. Now what happens to the truck?
It's pulled out of service, and just as I said a minute ago, if it gets into the fuel tank itself, it's a big problem. And I don't even know. You'd have to talk to the experts in the industry. The truck could be totally destroyed forever, because trace amounts of DEF can cause problems. And I don't know if you can ever get it out. If you look at that fuel tank picture, how do you get all those crystals out of a fuel tank? All the little crevices, all the little pieces of pipe. We have to prevent it from ever happening.
Another question, why not require a dye in FSII to distinguish it from DEF?
That's not going to happen. There's DEF used everywhere. And, you know, to change a product, it's like putting a dye into FSII. You know, we went down that road. We talked to them. It's not going to happen. And then you got to look at, we can't dye every product a different color. We have to pay attention, and we have to focus, and we have to have secured ways.
I'm sorry. There's another question. Is it possible to analyze this in a fuel sample?
If you put DEF in a fuel sample, you're going to see those crystallizations. There's a video that actually shows them injecting DEF into jet fuel. I'm going to work with NATA and get that added to prevent misfueling. So give us a week or two and you'll be able to see that video. It was created by Fadi over in Germany, where they actually do a test. That second picture I showed you with the crowdiness, there's a whole little video that shows that, but it'll instantly crystallize and go crazy. So, but it's too late. By the time it's in the fuel, it's too late.
Another question, why does this issue occur in jet fuel when it doesn't happen in diesel fuel? What's the difference between the fuels?
It does happen in diesel fuel. If you Google that, there has been so many diesel engines destroyed. I talked to a guy that works for Ford, and he said that they basically replace the entire fuel system, engine, everything that was touched. They don't even try to repair it. So it happens all the time in the diesel industry.
Another question, how quickly do the crystals develop and deposit in the hardware after DEF contamination?
Almost.
Really?
If you watch that video, it's almost instantaneously.
What is the critical level for DEF in jet fuel? If it's close to zero, okay.
You cannot have any DEF. DEF contamination is, 0%.
It says, it sounds like it's impossible for a flight crew to know if DEF was mistakenly placed in the FSII tank. Are there any precautions that pilots can take to verify prior to fuel being pumped?
It is impossible. The one thing pilots can do, they should talk to their FBO that they're buying fuel and ask them what their procedures are and what their documentation and how they prevent this from happening. You know, just like they do in misfueling. Pilots need, they can see that a little bit, but if you mix jet fuel and avgas together, you're not going to tell. You can smell it possibly, but there's no way for pilots to know. And this is where pilots talking to FBOs is another good reminder that the FBO is. So if I was a pilot and I was using FSI injection equipment, I would make sure with my FBO that they had good procedures in place. The more we talk about it, the more we keep it on the front burner so we don't have this mistake again.
Another question, can the FBO refuelers file ASRS voluntary reports to document events?
Yes, I mean, you buy the fuel from somewhere, you should always, if there's a mistake or something, talk to your fuel provider, talk to your person. So, we're not just like on a misfueling. We're not out to punish people. We want to learn from those mistakes, and we want to educate other people. That's why we started Save a Life, Verify Fuel. That's the reason I did this DEF thing. All the information's out there. I just want to bring it out in front of people again and talk to them to say, hey, let's keep it out there. Don't get complacent that it's not going to happen to you.
Another question, who has oversight over the quality of aviation fuel? Does the federal or state government have any oversight over quality control?
The FAA has programs, the FBOs have programs, the industry has programs. It's everybody working together It's, we do quality assurance because it's not like the automotive industry. If a truck gets DEF in it, they pull over on the side of the road and we call a tow truck. If it happens in an aircraft, they're going to find out at 20,000 feet with passengers on board. So that's why we do so much in quality assurance. And that's why we have to stay focused all the time. We can't get complacent because people depend on everybody doing their job and doing it right. But we're all humans. We all make mistakes. We learn from that and we never get complacent. And we do that quality assurance to protect the fuel. We do those procedures.
There's another question. Just to clarify, we still can't test DEF in jet fuel, though, correct? Only in the FSII container. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there's if you pulled a sample of the DEF, you got to remember we're putting in 1 gallon of fizzy per 1,000 gallons of jet fuel with that injector system. So if you sump your tank, that new fuel you put in may not be in your drop tubes. So there's just, I don't know of any way. I will talk to our experts. I mean, when we see it, we can do it. I just don't know if there's a field test that could detect it at that level, at the FBO. So, but that's a good question. I'll try to find out some information, and when I do, I'll get it to preventmisfueling.com, and we'll put it on the DEF page within ATA.
We have about 1 minute left. Here's maybe a quick question about how many minutes of operation on the known events before engine failure?
I don't know exactly. That's, the one aircraft, the second one was 18,000 feet. The first two in 2017, those aircraft were able to land. They went to bypass. The third one that I know of that was in the United States, they did a dead stick landing, so they lost all their engines. So before, in this last one, they landed, they flew quite a ways, and they were able to land it in another state. So, but the you can look at those filters and you can see that once you can't get fuel to the engines, your engine's going down. It ain't gonna run. I think on that one, the second one, they lost one engine. They didn't even try to get it restarted. They came back. By the time they were on the ground, they'd lost their second engine and they came in on one engine, taxiing in. But there's some really good videos of those pilots talking. I'm going to work with NATA to get that put on the DEF prevention page, some webinars or podcast, because when you hear the pilots talking, it makes you think about what happened. And there was passengers on that plane. The pilots did an incredible job. All these pilots have done an incredible job to get these aircraft back on the ground. But we've got to figure out a way to stop making these mistakes in the industry.